Hello, we are the Ministry of the Real Truth. Today we're going to do something different from what we normally do. We are going to look at the Egyptian histories, the Egyptian religion, etc. because we've heard many arguments on Sunday the TV, House of Consciousness live stream, that Christianity plagiarized all of its biblical stories from ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet. This is coming from ancient Egypt or Kemet adherents like Shaka Amos and so forth and others. So we're going to have a look at these books by renowned Egyptologist E.A.Wallace Budge. You're probably wondering who the heck was he in his day. So looking at the history of him. E.A.Wallace Budge, Sir Ernest Alfred Thompson, Wallace Budge, 27 July 1857 to 23 November 1934, was an English Egyptologist. Egyptology is the study of ancient Egyptian history, language, literature, religion, architecture and art from 5th millennium BC until the end of its native religious practices in the 4th century AD. A practitioner of the discipline is called an Egyptologist. He was also an Orientalist. The imitation or depiction of aspects in the Eastern world. These depictions are usually done by writers, designers and artists from the Western world, in particular Orientalist painting, depicting mosaic, etc. And philologist is the study of language in oral and written historical sources. It is the intersection of textual criticism, literary criticism, history and linguistics. Philology is also defined as the study of literary texts as well as oral and written records, etc. etc. And he worked for the British Museum, as does Irving Finkel, and published numerous works on the ancient Near East. That would be the Levant, probably Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient Iran, Anatolia, Asia Minor and the Armenian highlands, the Levant, Cyprus, etc. He made numerous trips to Egypt and Sudan on behalf of the British Museum to buy antiquities and help it build its collection of cuneiform tablets, manuscripts and papyri. He has published many books on Egyptology, helping to bring the findings to larger audiences. In 1920 he was knighted for his service to Egyptology and the British Museum. Personal life, where he was born, who he was born to, who his parents were. Budge became interested in languages before he was 10 years old, but left school at the age of 12 in 1869 to work as a clerk at the retail firm of W.H. Smith, which sold books, stationery and related products. In his spare time he studied Biblical Hebrew, also called Classical Hebrew, an archaic form of the Hebrew language, a language in the Canaanite branch of Semitic languages, spoken by the Israelites in the area known as the Land of Israel, roughly west of the Jordan River, etc. So Biblical Hebrew is also called Classical Hebrew, which is an archaic or an old form of the Hebrew language, a language in the Canaanite branch of Semitic languages, spoken by the Israelites in the area known as the Land of Israel. They weren't Canaanites, they just went into that land and probably adopted and adapted their language, their religion, their gods, hence the name of El, E-L, as in Elohim, coming from there, which was scripted wrong, because in the original ancient, very old Assyrian Aramaic or Tab Asherit, the title of God is El, E-I-L, not El, which is the article the. Okay? So it was scripted wrong by those particular Hebrews. Budge became interested in learning the ancient Assyrian language. Akkadian is an extinct East Semitic language that was spoken in ancient Mesopotamia from the 3rd millennium BC until its gradual replacement by Akkadian-influenced Old Aramaic among Mesopotamians by the 8th century. So that would be that Tav Asheret. The language coming from the Sumerians, who eventually faded out, who died out, adopted and adapted by the Akkadians, and then the Babylonians and the Akkadians started to fade away, die out, and so forth. But it's all Middle Eastern or Mesopotamian, Assyria based. Right? Budge became interested in learning the ancient Assyrian language in 1872 when he also began to spend time in the British Museum. Budge's tutor introduced him to the keeper of Oriental Antiquities, the pioneer Egyptologist Samuel Birch, and Birch's assistant, the Assyriologist George Smith. This is probably the guy that helped Henry Layard translate some of those cuneiform tablets. Smith helped Budge occasionally with his Assyrian. Birch allowed the youth to study cuneiform tablets in his office and obtained books for him from the British Library of Middle Eastern Travel and Adventure, such as Austin Henry Layard's Nineveh and its Remains. From 1869 to 1878, Budge spent his free time studying Assyrian, and during these years often spent his lunch break studying at St. Paul's Cathedral. John Stainer, the organist of the St. Paul's, noticed Budge's hard work and met the youth. He wanted to help the working class boy realise his dream of becoming a scholar. Stainer contacted W.H. Smith, Conservative Member of Parliament, and the former Liberal Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, asked him to help his young friend. Both Smith and Gladstone agreed to help Stainer to raise money for Budge to attend the University of Cambridge, and it helped to make him the man that he was renowned for. He marries Dora Helen Emerson. She dies in 1926. Budge was knighted in 1920 New Year Honours, etc. Career at the British Museum. Between 1886 and 1891, Budge was assigned by the British Museum to investigate why cuneiform tablets on British Museum sites in Iraq, which were to be guarded by local agents of the museum, were showing up in the collections of London antiquity dealers. The British Museum was purchasing these collections of what were their own tablets at inflated London market rates. Edward Augustus Bond, an English librarian, principal librarian of the museum, wanted Budge to find the source of the leaks and to seal it. Bond was also wanted Budge to establish ties to Iraqi antiquities dealers in order to buy available material at the reduced local prices in comparison to those in London. Budge also travelled to Istanbul during these years to obtain a permit from the Ottoman Empire. This is they were Muslim, right? Government to reopen the museum's excavations at these Iraqi sites. The museum archaeologists believe that excavations would reveal more tablets. There's more information on Budge. And he becomes an assistant keeper in this department after some guy called Ranulph retired in 1891. His literary and social career. Budge was also interested in paranormal and believed in spirits and hauntings. Budge had a number of friends in the Ghost Club, British Library, Manuscript Collections, Ghost Club Archives, a group in London committed to the study of alternative religions and spirit world. He told his many friends stories of hauntings and other uncanny experiences. Many people in his day who were involved with the occult and spiritualism after losing their faith in Christianity were dedicated to Budge's work, particularly his translation of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or Coming Forth of Day. Such writers as the poet William Butler Yeats and James Joyce studied and were influenced by this work of ancient religion. Budge's works on Egyptian religion have remained consistently in print since they entered the public domain. Here's some more information on Budge. Here's some secondary information on him in one of his books, the Book of the Dead, written by him in 1895, or it was published in 1895. According to John Mark Ockerbloom, the proprietor of the excellent online books page, the version, that's at sacredtext.com, circulating on the internet is a highly edited version of Budge from a much later date, 1913. He writes, he did a little legwork, and it appears that the mystery text is in fact from the Medici Society edition of 1913. According to a 1960 reprint by University Books, for this edition the translation was rewritten, and the greater part of the introduction was also rewritten by Sir Wallace, who concluded, Budge, who concluded a preface to it with the pleased words, and the entire work thus becomes truly a new edition. It's unclear whether Budge himself did the rewrite of this book. Here's the content, the introduction, the translation, etc., plates, and so forth. I'm going to have a sneaky peek at the book. Introduction, the versions of the Book of the Dead, the 4 great versions of the Book of the Dead. The history of the great body of religious compositions which form the Book of the Dead of the ancient Egyptians may conveniently be divided into 4 of the periods. This is the first one, which are represented by 4 versions. 1. The version which was edited by the priests of the College of Anu, the On of the Bible, and the Heliopolis of the Greeks, and which was based upon a series of texts now lost, but which there is evidence to prove had passed through a series of revisions or additions as early as the period of the 5th dynasty. This version was, so far as we know, or they knew, always written in hieroglyphics, and may be called the Heliopolitan versions. It is known from 5 copies which are inscribed upon the walls of the chambers and passages in the pyramids, directly from the walls, right? So the scribes in their day carved them in stone and pillars on walls. Of kings of the 5th and 6th dynasties at Saqqara, and sections of it are found inscribed upon tombs, sarcophagi, coffins, stelae, and papyri from the 11th dynasty to about AD 200. There's some references. The Theban version, which was commonly written on papyri and hieroglyphics and was divided into sections or chapters, each of which has had its distinct title but no definite place in the series. The version was much used when the 18th to the 20th dynasty. 3. A version closely allied to the preceding version, which is found written on papyri in the hieratic character and also in hieroglyphics. In this version, which came into use about the 20th dynasty, the chapters have no fixed order. 4. The so-called Saiti version, in which at some period anterior probably to the 25th dynasty, the chapters were arranged in a definite order. It is commonly written in hieroglyphics and in hieratic, and it was much used from the 26th dynasty to the end of the Ptolemaic period. Early forms of the Book of the Dead, the Book of the Dead. The earliest inscribed monuments and human remains found in Egypt prove that the ancient Egyptians took the utmost care to preserve the bodies of their dead by various processes of embalming. The deposit of the body in the tomb was accompanied by ceremonies of a symbolic nature, in the course of which certain compositions comprising prayers, short litanies, etc., having reference to the future life, were recited or chanted by priests and relatives on behalf of the dead. There's more information here. The title of Book of the Dead is usually given by Egyptologists to the editions of the larger work which are made in the 28th dynasty and following dynasties. But in this introduction, the term is intended to include the general body of texts which have reference to the burial of the dead and to the new life in the world beyond the grave, and which are known to have existed in revised editions and to have been in use among the Egyptians from about BC 4500 to the early centuries of the Christian era. Uncertainty of the history of its source. The home, origin and early history of the collection of ancient religious texts which have descended to us are at present unknown at that particular time he was writing, and all working theories regarding them, however strongly supported by apparently well ascertained facts, must be carefully distinguished as theories only, so long as a single ancient necropolis in Egypt remains unexplored and its inscriptions are untranslated. Whether they were composed by the inhabitants of Egypt, who recorded them in hieroglyphic characters and who have left the monuments, which are the only trustworthy sources of information on the subject, or whether they were brought into Egypt by the early immigrants from the Asiatic continent, whence they came, or whether they represent the religious books of the Egyptians incorporated with the funeral texts of some prehistoric dwellers on the banks of the Nile. All are questions which the possible discovery of inscriptions belonging to the first dynasties of the early empire can alone decide. The evidence derived from the enormous mass of new material which we owe to the all-important discoveries of mastaba tombs and pyramids by M. Maspero, and to his publication of the early religious texts, proves beyond all doubt that the greater part of the texts comprised in the Book of the Dead are far older than the period of Mena, or Menes, the first historical king of Egypt. Certain sections indeed appear to belong to an indefinitely remote and primeval time. So possibly somebody else brought those in. That's what he's saying there. Somebody before those Egyptians brought them into Egypt, with that geographical location. And there's some more data here. The earliest texts bear within themselves proofs not only of having been composed but also of having been revised. So they were revised or edited long before the days of King Mene, and judging from many passages and copies inscribed in hieroglyphics upon the pyramids of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty, about BC 3333, double 33, and Teta, Pt.1, Merin, and Ra, and Pt.2, kings of the 6th dynasty, and so forth. Again, it's got something here in French. Looks like roughly the number of something in the formulas, etc., etc. And it's got German underneath that. The Nile to fix the chronological time for the arts, etc., etc. The oldest form or edition of the Book of the Dead, as we have received it, supplies no information whatever as to the period when it was compiled, but a copy of the hieratic text inscribed upon a coffin of Mentuhotep, a queen of the 11th dynasty, about BC 2500, made by the late Sir J. G. Wilkinson, informs us that the chapter, which according to the arrangement of Lepsius bears the number LX15 1V, and was discovered in the reign of Hesepti, the 5th king of the Ist. That's the 1st dynasty, about BC 426-6. On this coffin are 2 copies of the chapter, the one immediately following the other, etc., etc. More history on it. Okay, a lot of information here. I'm not going to go deep into that. You can read it in your own time. Just go to sacredtext.com and look up Egyptian books and you'll find it. I'm going to jump to we already covered that. There's different there's the introduction with different chapters, different plates, and so forth. Okay, what's this? Okay. Ra, the local form of the sun god, usurps the place occupied by the more ancient form Temu. And it would seem that when the dogma had been promulgated by the College of Anu, it was accepted by the priesthood of all the great cities throughout Egypt. the great influence of the Anu school of priests even in the time of Unas is proved by the following passage from the text in his pyramid. O God, thy Anu is Unas. O God, thy Anu is Unas. O Ra, Anu is Unas, etc., etc. The mother of Unas is Anu, the father of Unas is Anu. Unas himself is Anu and was born in Anu. Elsewhere we are told that Unas cometh to the great bull which cometh forth from Anu, and that he uttereth words of magical import in Anu. I'm just thinking about the Mesopotamian myths, Babylonian cuneiform texts, where the pantheon of gods supposedly were upset with mortals because they were making too much noise and they couldn't sleep or something like that. They're just being pains in the butt, so they decided, we're going to destroy them. We're going to hit the polar ice caps, and then away we go in our spacecraft. Right. But this goddess or god of that pantheon called Anu, A-N-U, loves these creatures so much that told the certain boat builder to build a boat and survive and live on, to go forth from it. After everything was over, come out of the boat and replenish the earth, multiply and increase, all that sort of stuff. So it sounds very similar. That name sounds very similar to that god Anu in the Mesopotamian, but it's just it's spelled slightly differently. It has only one Anu in the Mesopotamian. The Syrian only has one N, whereas the Egyptian, by the looks of it, has two. But it could be the same god. They could have shared that idea, right? Or, best case scenario, the Mesopotamians, the Syrians, the Assyrians who came into Egypt could have been influenced by this Egyptian religion. And this god or goddess called Anu. If you have a look at the biblical Genesis genealogy, the account of who came first, you'll find that it all started from Iraq, Iran, that Middle Eastern area. And this ark wasn't a pretty little watermelon shaped boat, it was called a coracle, according to Irving Finkel, who translated the myth from the Babylonian cuneiform tablets, and he followed that plan that this Anu gave to this particular boat builder who he or she wanted to carry on and survive, right? And then multiply, increase and multiply, or multiply and increase, and so forth. That it was a coracle, it was a round vessel, and he recreated it, him and some friends, and they sailed it down this particular river. So it was very, very different from the biblical story of a Noah's Ark. And the guy was called Upancham, or had a different name. It was like N'(A.H) in the Palestinian Hebrew, or that particular area at the time. He was known as that. So very close to Noah. In reading Egyptian religious texts, the existence of the heavenly Anu, which was to the Egyptians what Jerusalem was to the Jews, and what Mecca still is to the Mohammedans or Islam, must be remembered. The heavenly Anu was the capital of the mythological world, and was to the spirits of men what the earthly Anu was to their bodies, i.e. the abode of the gods and the centre and source of all divine instruction. Like many other mythological cities, such as Abtu, Tatu, Pe, Tep, Kemet, etc., the heavenly Anu had no geographical position. some information here. The abode of the blessed in heaven was called Anu, and it was asserted that the souls of the just were there united to their spiritual or glorified bodies, and that they lived there face to face with the deity for all eternity. Judging from the fact that the texts in the tombs of Heru Tep and Neferu, and those inscribed upon the sarcophagus of Taka, all of the 11th and 12th dynasties, differ in extent only and not in character or contents from those of the royal pyramids of Saqqara of the 5th and 6th dynasties. It has been declared that the religion, as well as the art of the first Theban Empire, are nothing but a slavish copy of those of northern Egypt. So that particular copy was a copy of a northern Egyptian one. The Theban version, which was much used in Upper Egypt from the 28th to the the 18th to the 20th dynasty, was commonly written on papyri in the hieroglyphic character. The text is written in black ink in perpendicular rows of hieroglyphics which are separated from each other by black lines. The titles of the chapters of sections and certain parts of the chapters and the rubrics belonging to thereto are written in red ink. A steady development in the illumination of the vignettes is observable in the papyri of this period. At the beginning of the 18th dynasty, the vignettes are in black outline, but we see from the papyrus of Hunefer, British Museum number 9901, who was an overseer of cattle of Pt.1, king of Egypt, about BC 1370, that the vignettes are painted in reds, greens, yellows, white and other colours, and that the whole of the text and vignettes are enclosed in a red, etc., etc. border. The importance of Anu and its gods in the 6th dynasty is well indicated by a prayer from the pyramid of Pt.2. Hail ye great 9 gods who dwell in Anu, grant ye that Pepi may flourish, and grant ye that this pyramid of Pepi, this building built for eternity, may flourish, even as the name of the god Dumu, the chief of the great company of the 9 gods, doeth flourish. If the name of Shu, the lord of the celestial shrine in Anu, flourisheth, then Pepi shall flourish, etc., etc., and then his work shall endure to all eternity. Originally, each copy of the Book of the Dead was written to order, but soon a custom obtained of preparing copies of blank spaces in which the name of the purchaser might be inserted, and many of the errors in spelling and most of the omissions of words are no doubt due to the haste with which such stock copies were written by the members of the priestly caste whose profession it was to copy them. The papyri upon which copies of the Theban version were written varied in length from about 20 to go feet and so forth. Lots more information on that. The common name for the Book of the Dead in the Theban period, and probably also before this date, is Per-Em-Ru, which words have been variously translated and manifested in the light, coming forth from the day, coming forth by day, la manifestation au jour, etc., etc., all in French and German there, etc. This name, however, had probably a meaning for the Egyptians which has not yet been rendered in a modern language, and one important idea in connecting with the whole work is expressed by another title, which calls it the chapter of making strong or perfect the coup. So the coup or who. In the Theban version, the main principles of the Egyptian religion which were held in the times when the pyramid texts were written are maintained, and the views concerning the eternal existence of the soul remain unaltered. Many passages in the work, however, show that modifications and developments in detail have taken place, and much that is not met with in the early dynasties appears. So far as we know, for the first time, the vignettes too are additions to the work, but although they depict scenes in life beyond the grave, they do not seem to form a connected series, and it is doubtful if they are arranged on any definite plan. A general idea of the contents of this version may be gathered from the following list of chapters. The various chapters of the Book of the Dead were numbered by Lepsius in his edition of titled Turin Papyrus in 1842. This papyrus, however, is a product of the Ptolemaic period and contains a number of chapters which are wanting in the Theban version. For convenience, Lepsius numbers are retained, and the chapters which belong to the cited version are indicated by an asterisk. For the hieroglyphic text, you have to look at this Neville ein Leitgum, paragraph 193, etc. So maybe that is not an original copy, it's a rewrite, revision, maybe. You have to look at that information and figure that out for yourself. Chapter 5, the chapter of not allowing the deceased to do work in the underworld, and so forth. Scene of the worship of the rising sun by mythological beings. Okay, it's all about the pantheon of gods. The deceased adoring the groups of gods belonging to various cities. Chapter 19, the chapter of the crown. He's got a question mark here, of victory. So would that be like Christ giving someone the crown, good and faithful servant, and they go on to eternal life, to live forever, for all eternity? Could it be that similar? Yeah, something similar. And there's lots more information there. All these opportunities for the dead to remember their name, who they were, they could speak, they had a mouth, all this sort of stuff. The deceased with both hands raised in the afterlife, raised in adoration, kneeling before the goddess Met. So it's very different there, because they have a pantheon of gods by the looks of it. The deceased adoring three gods. A lot of mythical stories here. How a man, there's a chapter of a man changing into a god and of sending forth light into darkness. The chapter of changing into a lily. The chapter of changing into tar, of eating cakes, of drinking ale, of unloosing the body, and of living in Anu on the god Tar in a shrine. The chapter of changing into a phoenix. All these different animals. And there's lots more there. So it looks very different to what in that era to what the Christian stories, right, in the Bible. If you read this, you'll find that out. You'll realise that it's very different at this point. Does they have a pantheon of gods, whether it be animal based or animal representative, all this sort of stuff. The version akin to the Theban. And then it's the Scythian and Ptolemaic version, paleography. They were in vogue from the period of the 26th dynasty, about BC 550, to probably the end of the rule of the Ptolemies over Egypt. The chapters have a fixed and definite order, and it seems that a careful revision of the whole work was carried out, and that several alterations of an important nature were made in it. So the Ptolemies, etc., made these changes by the sound of it. A number of chapters which are not found in older papyri appeared during this period, but these are not necessarily new inventions, whereas the kings of the 26th dynasty are renowned for having revived the arts and sciences and literature of the earliest dynasties. It is quite possible that many or most of the additional chapters are nothing more than new editions of extracts from older works. Many copies of this version were written by scribes who did not understand what they were copying, and omissions of signs, words, and even whole passages are very common in papyri of the Ptolemaic period. It is impossible to read many passages without the help of texts of earlier periods. The papyri of this period vary in colour and etc. So these Ptolemies were creating these copies. The scribes, the Ptolemaic scribes, were making these copies, and they didn't know what the hell they were copying, basically. And it looks like further down here they copied it. Looks like further down here they've copied the Egyptian incorrectly. These Ptolemies. It is evident that they were written and drawn by ignorant workmen in the quickest and most careless way possible. In this period also certain passages of the text were copied in hieratic and demotic upon small pieces of papyri, which were buried with portions of the bodies of the dead, and upon narrow bandages of coarse linen in which they were swathed. Yeah, they were written in red. The titles of the chapters, catchwords and words, etc., which introduce a variant reading, etc., are sometimes papyrus and are painted in somewhat crude colours. In some papyri, the disc on the head of the hawk or Horus is covered with gold leaf instead of being painted red as is usual in older papyri. In the Greco-Roman period, both texts and vignettes are very carelessly executed, and it is evident that they were written and drawn by ignorant workmen in the quickest and most careless way possible. So if you're looking for someone to blame, to point the finger at and say, oh yeah, they plagiarized it, it was the Greeks, the Ptolemies, they wanted to take the texts and make them very Greeky, make out that they were theirs, Greek flavoured. Supposedly the Greeks did plagiarize a lot of the ancient Egyptian or Khemites knowledge, and then went to Athens and says, this is what we discovered, what we came up with, but the elites, the philosophers, etc., already in Greece said, no, we don't like this idea because this will change everything. We're sticklers for the old, we're not going to accept this new one. So a lot of them were imprisoned or kicked out of the Greece, banished or whatever, and many of them had their heads lopped off. These Greeks wanted to stop that because they were sticklers for the old philosophies. They didn't want anything new.